All right, some information on the Volantex Ranger 600. The 600 millimeter. It's the new four-channel version that they came out with, and I love the paint scheme. It's black foam with acid green highlights on it and white highlights. It's got a silver canopy, and it's the absolute best beginner plane that I've had in the air. And I have flown a lot of microplanes. I have flown a lot of beginner planes, and this is without a doubt the easiest plane. The easiest plane that I've ever had in the air. And to top that off, they continued to use the Volantex V761 protocol, so you can bind up to it with a multi-protocol transmitter. It's so stable and it's so docile and so easy to fly. It's easy to fly in manual mode with the stock transmitter. It's a piece of cake to fly with a hobby grade transmitter in manual mode. I fly it in full manual mode the vast majority of the time. It handles the wind exceptionally well. When you've got it in fully stabilized mode, I have flown it in wind of 8 to 10, gusting to 12, and that says a lot about the stability of this plane, considering its all-up weight is just under 70 grams. You could tie 3 of these together with the flight batteries in them, and you'd still be under the 250 gram limit with the FAA. So I don't know how they managed to make this plane so light, but it is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so tips on this plane. The canopy is a little hard to get off, on mine anyway. The latch snaps in pretty tight. So what I did was I took a little piece of carbon slat and I glued it into the front of the canopy. So I've got a little carbon tab there that I can use to pop the front of the canopy off. That makes it a lot easier for me. If you're having to land in an area like I land in, where it's hard pack, it's dirt, sand, gravel, and it's pretty rutted out, the little half arc landing skids on it are just foam. So what I did was I had this little green ping pong ball, and I cut it in half, and then I shaped it so it would fit that green ping pong ball, and the green is the same color as the highlights on the airframe, so it looks like it was made that way. But I took the ping pong ball and I just glued it over top of that little foam landing skid in the front, and then out of the other half of the ping pong ball I just cut a little arc out of it and used that as a landing skid for the little tail bump, foam bump on the back of it. So if you have to land on an abrasive surface like I do, just go to the dollar store or a department store where they have like a little sporting goods section and get some of those colored ping pong balls. They come in really handy for different types of landing skids on planes like this. So that's what I did, and it worked out really well, and the foam is protected when I land it. This plane has exceptional slow flight capability and an exceptional glide with it. If you had some consistent wind in one direction, I don't think you would have any problems sloping this plane. Even in fully stabilized mode, it has such a tight turn radius. I mean, if you use some rudder and some aileron, you can just spin it right around. So with this little plane, if you have access to an indoor arena, like a gymnasium or something, you're not going to have any problems flying this plane inside of a gymnasium. And if you put a little all-in-one, 5 or 6 gram FPV camera on it to fly around indoors in the wintertime or fly outdoors like I do, that'll make it even funner if you put an FPV camera on it. All right, so there's links in the show notes to an exclusive link from Ground Control RC with an exclusive coupon code. If you haven't pulled the trigger on this plane yet, the link that I have in there with the coupon code, you'll be able to buy this for a steal. I think this plane is worth every penny at the full retail price that they're asking for it, considering how well it flies, the slow flight capability that it has, The fact that it's so lightweight, the fact that it can handle the wind, and that you can maneuver it well enough that you can fly it indoors if you want to. It's just an exceptional plane, and I have a blast with it. Okay, so let's take a look at the setup that I have on it. If you're a absolute beginner, and if you're only going to be flying it with the stock transmitter, you're done. You don't need to do anything. The plane handles exceptionally well with the default setup, the way it is out of the box, with the stock transmitter in fully stabilized mode. You're not going to have any problems flying this plane whatsoever. If you have a multi-protocol transmitter and you're wanting to bind up to it with that, and you want it to be a bit more maneuverable. Okay, so the plane, I'll have my CG listed below. The plane has a neutral balance on my CG. The CG where I balance it is right under the main wing spar. So if you just put your fingers underneath the main wing spar with the flight battery positioned in the front of the plane, and I think I have mine pushed all the way forward, I've got a neutral balance on it, so when I balance it at that point, the plane is perfectly level. It doesn't drop its nose, it doesn't drop its tail. And I fly it in full manual mode that way, and it works out extremely well. That's a good CG. All right, so if you want to make it more maneuverable, and the way I have my linkage set up, I have it set up so it makes really nice tight loops. If you want to do really tight loops, it has a much speedier roll rate on it. So if you pick up some speed with the plane and give it full deflection on the ailerons, you know, with the stock setup, I was having to input negative elevator when it was inverted to prevent it from losing too much altitude. So now with the way I have the linkage set up on the ailerons, if I get up enough speed, I can do full deflection on the ailerons and perform a roll without having to input any negative elevator when it's inverted. So it rolls fast enough that it's not going to lose much altitude. So I like that. So on the aileron control horns, there's nothing you can really do with the linkage at the servo, but at the control horns, it's a 3-hole control horn. I think the default was it was in the center hole. I moved the control linkage to the innermost hole to give me the maximum amount of movement on the ailerons. On the elevator control horn, same thing. I moved it to the innermost hole on the control horn, which would be the hole that's closest to the actual elevator, or the one that's closest to the actual aileron, the innermost hole. That gives me enough elevator control that I can perform some pretty fast, pretty tight loops with it. As a matter of fact, I can do 5 or 6 of them in a row with that plane. The elevator servo arm, you want it, it's a 2-hole control arm. I think by default it comes in the outermost hole. If it's not, you want to move it to the outermost hole on the control arm. The rudder control horn, you can move it to the innermost hole on the 3-hole control horn for the rudder. That will give you an even tighter, turn radius just using rudder. But it really, the rudder's pretty effective because it's a long tail, so you got a long lever. So even if you just leave it in the default position, which I think is the center hole on the 3-hole control horn at the rudder, it's still going to give you plenty of control authority on the rudder. I just moved it in so I could do some stall turns and things like that. So, and the rudder servo arm, same thing. It's a 2-hole control arm for the rudder servo. If it's not in the outermost hole, I would move it to the outermost hole. Okay. And here's my dual rate and expo. I've got 100% dual rate on everything, on the aileron, the elevator, the rudder. On the aileron and the elevator, I've got 70% expo. That makes the control surfaces really, really smooth. I've got 50% expo on the rudder. My control surface deflection, and this is measured in manual mode. So make sure you've got your gyro set in full manual mode when you measure your deflection. On the ailerons, I've got 12 millimeter up and 12 millimeter down. On the elevator, I've got 5mm up and 5mm down. Doesn't sound like much, but it doesn't take a lot of movement in the elevator to give you a lot of authority, because like I said, that's a long tail boom and it's a long lever, so it doesn't take a whole lot of deflection in order to really rotate it in the pitch axis. On the rudder, I got 10mm left and 10mm right. Okay. My CG location, as I stated earlier, is right underneath the main wing spar with the neutral balance. My launch throttle is 60%, takes right off with just a moderate chuck with a slightly upward angle at 60% throttle, doesn't even lose any altitude. For those of you who have a multi-protocol transmitter, the protocol is the Volantex V761 protocol. Sub-protocol is going to be 4-channel. You can set up your gyro modes on channel 5, and that's really it. That's all you need to do. So this is my setup. If you watch the latest flights that I've had with this plane, this is the setup that I use. That's the CG I used, and it's just a joy of a plane. Just a joy of a plane. All right, so that's a wrap on this episode, guys. If you haven't got one yet, and you pull the trigger on it based on my recommendation, you're going to thank me for it. It's that good. So anyway, that's a wrap on this episode. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time in the Tinker's Lab.